My name is Christie Nicholson, and I'm here today with Dr. Nina Kraus in New York City at the BrainMind event, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us. Dr. Kraus, you are an auditory biologist and a professor at Northwestern University, and you are head of the auditory neuroscience lab, BrainVolts. I love the name. And you're also the director of the Knowles Hearing Center. So I wanted to start with first, let's understand what is auditory neuroscience.
Well, so I'm a biologist, and I think of auditory neuroscience as what is happening biologically when we make sense of sound. And the field, as many fields in hearing, is vast. But I'm particularly interested in what it is that our brain does when we make sense of sound.
And you've said that sound is one of the hardest things that the brain does.
Yeah.
This is really interesting.
Yeah.
Is it harder than vision?
Well, think about it. First of all, sound is so under-recognized because it's invisible, and it also invisible are the different ingredients in sound. So if you take a visual object, so it has a texture, a shape, a color, and it has obvious ingredients. Sound, first of all, it's invisible, and people don't pay attention to it as much as they should, like other very powerful forces in our lives, like gravity. But it has ingredients too, like pitch, timing, timbre, phase, loudness, frequency modulation, amplitude, all of it. It's full of ingredients. And we need to know how our brain makes sense of all of these ingredients. This is something that I study. So making sense of sound is one of the hardest jobs we ask our brain to do, because this information is coming very, very, very quickly. So anybody who does sound will know that the sound consists of microsecond components and millisecond components and second components. And so we have to understand what is being said on all of these different time scales, and we can get some insight into what's happening biologically.
And it's always all around us, and it's happening, we can hear some background noise right now, you and I, and our brain is taking that in, but we have to attend to certain things. So unlike our eyes, it's
all around us, and you can never turn your ears off.
Right.
You can close your eyes, but you've got sound that is all around you, 3D.
Does attention impact that? I mean,
of course.
And that's obviously varies from person to person.
But I think that one of the things that is not recognized and is a very big part of auditory neuroscience is the fact that the hearing brain is vast. People just think of ear and brain, but in fact, the hearing brain engages what we know, how we think, how we combine our other senses, how we feel, even our viscera, how we move. This is all part of the hearing brain. So, this is a vast, vast system that is really fun to study biologically, but it's, I think, important to keep in mind how big this system really is.
And to dig into some of that, when you mentioned just now feeling, of course I thought of emotion and music, but even tone of voice and that, and also the physical movement of our bodies, presumably with music especially. There's a reason why our bodies dance a certain way to a beat connection. Can
all
you
of
talk
that.
About
Oh yeah.
That?
So if the hearing brain engages all of these systems, then it's inherently a part of all of these different systems all at once. And people even less think about is our viscera. So you may have noticed that that food tastes a little off on an airplane, and people thought that the reason was because of the dryness of the air. Turns out, scientists have looked at this carefully, it's the sound. Because sound is our alarm sense. And we're hearing this sound, which is a kind of not an evolutionarily familiar sound. And who's hungry when there's an avalanche coming?
Right. Just that roar and that hum.
Yeah. And so, so really, when we Here, we are engaging all of these systems at once.
How did you first know that you wanted to be a biologist, but then also move into sound and music?
Well, I grew up in a house where more than one language was spoken. My mom was a pianist, and when I was a kid, I loved to bring my little things under the piano and hang out there because it felt really good, all that big sound.
Oh, yeah.
And then when I went to college, I majored in comparative literature. So I've always bounced back and forth between art and science. I majored in comparative literature, then I took biology, and I fell in love with biology. Then I discovered a book by Eric Lenberg called The Biological Bases of Language. And I thought, oh, yeah, this is great, because I live at the intersection of fields. And so you can combine the language and the biology. In fact, I teach a class called Biological Bases of Speech and Music. And, and I've always felt that I belong in the intersection of multiple fields. And that I think has been our great strength. And also it has been a liability in terms of we don't really fit into a particular field, so you're always a little bit the goofball. But I love that's what I am, and if it wasn't for goofballs, I wouldn't have any friends at all. And there's so much interesting science happening at that intersection, I think.
Right, creativity, innovation happens at the intersection of disciplines. Well, on that point about language and music, and you do a lot of work around music and the brain, is there a notable distinction that you want to comment on between language
absolutely.
and the brain, and how the two combine together?
So as a biologist, we have discovered ways of measuring sound processing in the brain with remarkable precision. And so, as I'm talking to you now, the neurons in your brain that respond to sound are producing electricity, and with sensors on the scalp, you can measure that electricity. And we have done this in thousands of people, speaking different languages, different kinds of musicians, across the lifespan. And one of the things that we have found is that, remember I talked about these ingredients of sound. The musician's signature consists of very good processing of the harmonics in sound, and of timing elements. And so in music, this is really important for if you have a piano and a piccolo playing the same note, the difference is in the harmonics, right? But the harmonics are also important for distinguishing speech. So did I say bad or dad? That's in the harmonics and in timing. And so what you get strengthened by making music is important not only for music, but for language and for your ability to make sense of emotion in sound. When you hear a baby crying, whether or not you should get up in the night is in the harmonics. Does he mean it?
Fascinating, right. And in the acquisition of languages and learning new languages once you know another, just tensing and noticing that change in
Absolutely.
Is huge.
Yeah. Noticing that change and being, because we are, biologically, we are what we do.
Yeah.
And so we inherently learn about certain sounds, and we get more and less tuned. If I have electrodes on your head and you're sound asleep, and I say the sound, I call your name, your brain will respond to that name, not to my name, but to your name, because it's something that you have overlearned is an important sound to pay attention to.
And the neural pathway has been well worn, and
Exactly.
that's the attention. If we didn't have that, we'd be lost in a sea of sound.
And that's why biologically we are what we do, which is why it's really important for us to be making really good choices about how we spend our time in sound. One of the reasons why the Mind-Brain Conference is so important.
Yeah, can you say more about that? And also, I'd love to hear about noise.
Yeah.
And I guess they call it noise pollution and how that impacts us.
Yeah. So, you can think of sound as, sound is for better and for worse, right? We have sound, and so sound connects us for better, and for worse, it is a pollution of disconnection. Sound is our alarm sense. So we automatically will respond to really any sound biologically. And increasingly people are saying, I'm so stressed, I'm anxious, I have difficulty focusing. Well, a lot of it is because of the noise that is around us. I define noise as meaningless and unwanted sound. Now, by now everybody knows that very, very loud sounds will damage your ears. I'm not talking about the sound levels that will damage your ears. I'm talking about the moderate level sounds, the sounds that are occurring, at the levels of our conversation, but that are noise. And this very much affects our ability to think, how we feel. There are deep biological roots here, and we don't even realize, how many times, you're in your kitchen and the air conditioning or the refrigerator cycles off, and you didn't even know it was there until you could hear the silence, and your body says, and we have to be able to make good choices about this, because with sound, once you turn it off, it's gone.
How should we deal with that? Some people get noise-canceling headphones. You and I have talked about that. But what are other ways?
I think, I'm staying in a hotel here. And this morning I walk out of my hotel room, I get into the elevator, and there is this nasty music going on. I love music. But we are being robbed of our thoughts, of our solitude, of our ability to think, because there is constantly sound going on that is unnecessary and that keeps us from listening to the important things. So, certainly any establishment, all they need to do is turn the sound off. There are so many choices like that. For example, does my neighbor need to know every time I lock and unlock my car door? You can turn that off. If people became aware of how sound in the form of noise affects our health, we would make quieter vacuum cleaners and hair dryers and
coffee grinders,
all of those things, and the technology is there. I mean, we have been making quiet submarines since before World War II. You look in nature, owls are able to jump onto their mouse prey silently because of baffling systems in their wing. I mean, the technology is completely there, and we just have to know it and value it and make good choices for ourselves and our family and our educational systems.
Thank you for that. I agree. Can you speak a little bit about a potential breakthrough moment that you remember in your work? It could be in the study, it could be from something results of research. If you think back, you probably had a number of them, but something that was surprising.
I suppose one of the things that really has made an impression on me is, when I first began studying auditory neuroscience, I was measuring responses from individual neurons. And when we taught an animal to make a sound to meaning connection. So, there was a bunny and there was a sound, and every time the sound happened, some form of reward occurred. And I could measure the response of this one neuron, same sound, and after the animal had learned, same sound, same bunny, same neuron, I could see that the neural response, the firing patterns of these neurons, of this one neuron that I was looking at, changed. And so I was looking at the biology of learning firsthand.
Wow.
And so I moved throughout my career. We use animal models, but I've done a lot of work with speech and with language. But if you are interested in learning, music is the jackpot. music engages all of those systems of our cognitive, sensory, motor, reward, visceral systems. Music engages all of that. And so if you're interested in the biology of learning, studying learning is a really great way to go, which is where we have focused a lot of our work recently.
Right, right. And the importance of musicians and how much that helps them later on in life, of just studying music early on is so helpful.
Well, yeah, but you have to know that it doesn't matter how good you are. Music is a way of life. And
right. Oh, I love that. Say more about that.
Music is a way of life. You don't have to be famous. You don't have to be good. But, if I have these grandbabies now, I can take their little feet and I can sing, because I talk to them in Italian, batti, batti, I piedini. Anybody can do this. And making music is probably one of the best things you can do to strengthen all these parts of your hearing brain. Years ago, I was approached by founders of music programs in LA and in Chicago public schools, and these were in low-income areas. And the founders came to me and they said, Nina, the teachers already know that the students who make music are the better students. We already know this. What's going on in their brain?
Right.
And so we studied them year after year after year, and what we discovered, in fact, is that only the students who made music had this tremendous strengthening of the harmonics and the timing of sound, which again is important for everything they do, for language, for interpreting emotion, for music. And we could see this, and we are also able to listen to the brain. So the way that we have developed a way to measure the brain's response to sound, in the same way as right now the microphone is picking up my voice, and you have electricity that is then turned back into sound through a speaker. You can take the electricity of the brain, because the currency of the nervous system is electricity, and you can feed it through a speaker, and you can listen to the brain, and you can listen to the brain of a child who has had a musical education, or the brain of a child who has not. And another area that we study is concussion.
Oh, right.
Because think about the fact that making sense of sound is one of the hardest jobs we ask our brain to do. So if you get hit in the head, it's going to disrupt this very fine process. And we have been studying all of our 500 Division I athletes at Northwestern University.
Oh, wow.
And we have discovered that, in fact, getting a concussion will disrupt the hearing brain.
Right.
And we can hear that, we can listen to these brains. But we also are now investigating, how can we use the arts? How can we use music? How can we use rhythm to improve concussion recovery?
Right. And presumably stroke would have something to that as well, or is it completely different?
No, it's not completely different.
Yeah, it would be because a lot of times it's the auditory and it's the ability to even speak, and that's all completely connected.
Yeah. But with concussion, it's really remarkable how you can see how the concussion has disrupted the synchrony of the hearing brain, and then you can see when an athlete is ready to return to the field.
Wow. Yeah.
Or return to the classroom, and isn't it wonderful to think about being able to look at disruption of the brain in an athlete well before his brain is on a slab in the morgue and you are diagnosing CTE. Because we can see evidence of subconcussion and of what really getting hit in the head a lot can do to the nervous system and to the underlying synchrony.
The tools of observation are just incredible, and really push the whole field of any kind of field forward. What is one sound that you don't like?
Beeping trucks.
Oh, right. Me too. And here we are in New York City, the land of beeping trucks.
Yeah, but again, we have to think about it, because if you're in a construction area, beeping trucks matter. But every delivery van does not need to have that. And again, we live in this litigious society where you can count how many people were hurt by a truck that beeped, that backed up.
Right. And versus
how many people were hurt in a truck that backed up, versus what you can't measure is how much psychological and physical distress has occurred from this noise. And that, I think, is something that we really need to honor, and not just be thinking about things that we can directly count and measure and keep track of.
I want to talk for like another hour.
Well, that's the wonderful thing about sound is
You're also
love
inspiring
it.
me so much.
And I mean, my book of Sound Mind is my love letter to sound, and I'm so lucky to be able to do the work that I do.
Dr. Kraus, what is one thing you wish you really understood?
Well, I am lucky to be working in a field that is so big and deep and tall that we are never going to understand how is it that music really operates in our nervous system, and the biology of how we make sense of sound is something that is so complex and mysterious, that we understand a little bit. And so what I'm very happy about is chipping away at that and understanding bit by bit, having these new revelations, of the fact that making music really strengthens the hearing brain, and that the hearing brain is so vast. So it's wonderful to understand these things, but I love the fact that the things that I'm really interested in we'll never understand. Why is it that that music and trance and rhythm and trance are so intersecting? We understand a tiny bit about the biology, but first of all, mystics have known this for centuries and centuries, and we're new to the party, and we're just understanding a tiny little bit. But how is it that the vibration? How is it that music? And when I play music, I get into a kind of trance,
right?
That kind of puts together all of the bits and pieces that I have learned and practiced over the years. But I get into this trance, and how does that work?
Right, the endless curiosity, and it is like magic and a mystery to be unfolded continually.
Yeah.
What are your asks of the general public?
Well, I would love to be able to really understand and study how rhythm and music can improve concussion recovery. So I would love help in having, we've done this in small scale studies, so we know that this is an effect, but we would really like to have a large scale study to investigate this deeply.
It's important.
So, I need help with that. Also, we have developed this biological response to sound, which is called the FFR, the frequency following response.
Right.
And, in my book, in chapter 4, I talk about the quest, which has been, for decades, I have tried to figure out how do we record sound processing in the brain with tremendous precision. Yeah. Well, we can do this now, and it has been used for a long time in research, but now it is time for it to become incorporated into mainstream clinical care. We can tell in a toddler by his brain response to sound if he's going to struggle to read later on. We can, if a child is having difficulty with any form of auditory communication, we can understand, is there or is there not a biological component to this? We can measure sound processing in people with hearing loss. What happens as we age?
Right.
And how do our behaviors influence this? So I would love to see this biological measure, which is completely non-invasive. You just deliver sound through earbuds, and you have a few scalp electrodes, and then you can get this snapshot of a person. And imagine if you could use it to fit hearing aids. If I could say, okay, well, let me try this hearing aid, and I can see with your brain, this hearing aid works better than that hearing aid. And if this just became part of the standard of clinical care in almost every realm, concussion is another one. You know, whenever we get we get publicity on our concussion work, people write to me and they say, "I had no idea." Ever since I've had a concussion, I've had a hard time making sense of sound. And you know, people don't realize this, but if it was part of the clinical care, and again, you know, we can measure brain responses on the playing field, we can measure them in a clinic, and it's time now to become biologically informed about sound. And so I would love the help that it would take to make our sound processing in the brain measure really to integrate it into clinical care.
We're at this event called BrainMind and this organization. What are your thoughts about it? What are your observations about the BrainMind organization?
Well, there are a couple. One is that it's wonderful to bring together an intersection of fields. And as I know myself, you know, the agony and the ecstasy of crossing fields is, you know, the ecstasy is that it's really a wonderful way to learn and to bring science forward. But the fact that it crosses multiple fields makes funding these research programs really challenging, because you don't fit into a particular silo, and you really do work at the intersection. And so by bringing in people who are interested in furthering our knowledge of you know, anything that has to do with arts and literature and the biology therein is going to be difficult to fund otherwise. And so having people who are really interested in moving ahead our knowledge of the arts and the brain is hugely important and doesn't exist really very much in the world. And so that's a very unique aspect of the BrainMind group. And also, you know, we are forgetting how to listen.
Yes, I wanted to ask you about that. It sounds inextricably connected to listening. So tell me how you've observed the evolution of listening.
Well, first of all, let me just say one thing about the BrainMind conference, which is that it's really well organized, and we have had many meetings along the way, and the group has really listened to the participants. And I think it's, you know, a great conference because of that listening. So we are losing we are getting worse and worse at listening, because you know, we're listening to sound usually through Zoom or through not a direct movement of air, with music, with live concerts. We have a shorter attention span. We're always very visually biased. We have a noisy world. And so this really erodes our ability to listen deeply. And there's so much to listen for. And you know, I think our ancestors were much, much better at this than we are. And this is sadly a part of our experience in life that is being eroded. And I think we need to try to really be mindful of how can we listen more, listen better. And this I think is a real threat. The squashing of our ability to listen is a real threat to us, and we have to make good choices to strengthen our listening ability. You know, read to your children, listen to audiobooks, make music. You know, making music is a wonderful way of listening deeply. You have to listen deeply. And again, it doesn't matter how good you are, but you do listen to the nuances and you tune your hearing brain.
Dr. Kraus, this has been an extraordinary conversation. I love speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.